Welcome back. Thanks for coming back from lunch. We're going to have a short session now on community digital storytelling, and I'd like to introduce Olivia Robinson, the Manager Research Advocacy and Partnerships, Queensland Memory of the State Library.
Good afternoon, everyone. We just wanted to take the opportunity for a few minutes to share some community digital stories that have been recorded recently. One is actually, the first one that we wanted to share is of Mr. Sonny Minicon, who's in the audience. Thanks, Sonny. Sonny's actually come down from the Sunshine Coast for today and is with his family, Leona and Sue. We recorded Sonny's story as part of a project that actually Melda Miller and I worked on in 2011 on the Sunshine Coast called Floating Land. And actually we worked with Krishna Naho as well on that. It was part of an exhibition called My Island Homes and also part of an initiative by the Sunshine Coast Council called 160 Characters, which is all about digital storytelling. So please enjoy Sonny's story.
My name's Sonny Minicon. I've lived on the coast here for 77 years now. I was born at Nambour General Hospital. Mum and Dad lived at Budrum at the time. My mother's parents come from Watu and my father's come from Solomons. That's my mother's family. That's Grandfather Lemon, Grandma Lemon. Grandma had a house up there in Budrum, surrounded with trees, and all around the fence was coffee trees and bananas and pawpaws. As you walked up the steps to go in the house, they had a sugar bag hanging on either side, filled up. And every time you walked up, you had to give it a punch or two. And that was their coffee beans, is the husked beans. Yeah. We only had white friends at school. We were the only coloured people there. Actually, I didn't really know that I was a black person until I went in the army. I got called up in the NASHO, National Service, rude awakening then. We just said you weren't supposed to be as smart as you were. See, I finished up a corporal, and all these other guys, I'm bossing them around. And some of them didn't like it, especially the guys from the other side of the range. But after a while, it all settled down. Everything turned out good. When I came out, there was a few of my mates had picked up a cane cut down Eula Creek, just down here a bit. Asked me if I'd go with them, so that was my first season. Oh, it was hard work, but it was good money. I used to have 10 Vita Brits before I went. That used to keep me going until 8 o'clock. Because I used to leave home about 3:30, 4 o'clock. That's one of the trucks there. There was 4 of us. And if you have a look along there, there should be about 20 trucks right through. That was a day's work for the 4 of us. And that's all cane on the ground to be loaded tomorrow. That's my brother with Dad's old truck. That was a 6-cylinder Buick. And it used to be a limousine. And they cut the back down, moved the back of the car right up to there and made a 2-ton truck out of it. He used to cut firewood. Christmas time or any holidays was to I'll get on the back of that and go down to Bye-Bye. And there was a big mango tree there. And he'd park under this mango tree and we'd unload everything out of that, and chain line ran right down to the South Sea Island land down there. So we put everything on the cane trucks, wheel it down on the cane truck and put the tents up. And we were in heaven there. There was 4 or 5 houses down there. Pop taught us how to crab with a crab hook, and we used to go up along the drains and hook them out of the holes with the crab hook. And one would be hooking them out with a hook, and the other one would be standing there with a big dollop of mud, and as soon as they come out, you plonk the mud on top of them. It was more or less given to the South Sea Islanders as a recreational venue. It's something that the South Sea Islanders have to hold on to. To me, it's more or less sacred. That's how I feel about it, just from childhood memories of it. When we were granted recognition, my sister Adele came here one day and she said, I've got some words here, I think we could make a song out of this. So that's how it started. Managed to survive. Now we're working together to make things right. From the shackles and chains and a cane cutting knife. The thing is, we lost our culture. And whenever anybody asks me, I give them the history. I say my grandparents were slaves, and there's a lot of Australians that don't even know that there was slavery in Australia, and quite a few of them are shocked. So I am really proud to be a South Sea Islander, but I'm also proud to be an Australian. Now for 3 generations we bowed our heads, the forgotten people, that's what they said. Now we stand tall for all to see. The Australian government has recognised our history.
Sonny, could I just ask if you could stand up? Thank you. Thanks very much. Thanks very much for sharing your story. There's another 2 very short digital stories that we wanted to share with you. As part of the anniversary celebrations and commemorations this year, 11 Australian South Sea Islanders from around Queensland and Vanuatuan artists participated in a 3-day multimedia storytelling workshop at The Edge, which is part of the State Library just outside this building. This was done in collaboration with the Ethnic Communities Council of Queensland and Griffith University. Their task was to produce a story to the theme of Australian South Sea Islanders 150 years, what does it mean? The resulting stories were dynamic and each so different, ranging from family history to politics, and at sometimes quite emotionally cathartic for the participants. But they are all very proud to share their stories and to have created them themselves. So the 2 we'd like to share today is one by Dennis Bagongi and also Milani Yassari. Thank you.
My name is Dennis Babongi, and I'm the son of Samson and Florence. Samson is the descendant of the Wallo tribe from North Malaysia and the Solomon Islands. My first recollections of his history, my father's history, is of him telling and relating to us his father's story, my grandfather's story. He begins by telling us that one day my grandfather, as a 16-year-old, was swimming in the harbour at Betihama in North Malaya, and he noticed a large ship pulling in and anchoring in the harbour. And shortly after, the people on the boats invited him onto the ship, onto the boat, to go in and have a party. So he got up on the deck, and once he was on deck, they invited him to go below deck. And when he was down there, they closed the trapdoors, and he was underneath, and they kept on filling the boats, and then he was kidnapped to Queensland. He was forced to work on many and varied plantations, and then he was housed in the sheds or quarters that were provided by the plantation owners. And but because of the strange environment and harsh conditions, many of his peers had died in that situation while living there. Slowly over time, he adapted to his new situation. He began to grow cultural crops like taro, and he looked for mangrove shoots and took advantage of the areas where were good for fishing and crabbing, and that was very good in his situation, helped him to survive. After some time, he settled and he met and married Joyce Fernana, and they had a family, but Joyce passed away, and he remarried Emma Fakwandi. And overall, he spoke in Pidgin English, and he told his children not to speak Pidgin or speak the language that he'd grown up on. He never taught them, but he said, you're in a new culture, a new environment. You've got to forget that. You have to learn English. You've got to go to school and learn to live in the Australian society. We became culturally illiterate, except for the foods. In other words, we lost most of our culture, the language, the traditional dance and songs, and we had to learn the new culture and do. My parents had 13 children, and from that 13 came over 200 descendants. And so we as a family had learnt early on from my father that we were to stick together and support one another. And we are settled now. One of the positive things is that we are settled now, and my grandchildren are able to become prosperous in a modern Australia.
And Chloe. As a fifth generation, I had never had any interest in learning about our culture from my grandparents, purely because we lived in a mainstream world and I was too interested in playing games, everything like that. So as I got older and started having my children, they started questioning me, so it was about time that I started finding out for them, as well as my own self, our heritage, where we come from. We've always known that our family is from Urangan, Harvey Bay. Our great-grandfather, Frederick Davis, he had settled there. He had bought land and was very active in the Harvey Bay community. So after he had done that, he had encouraged his children to move out and explore parts of Queensland and build their own foundations. Grandad Davis toured with a boxing circuit. He was known as Billy Burke. He then settled in Mackay, and he lived in Havana, where he used to do the crushing and cut cane. I was told that he used to ride a bike to work. Used to go home and get his cane knife, get on his bike, and then off he went to cut cane. After that, they moved to Farley, which is where he raised his 10 children, and he worked at the Farley sugar mill for 32 years, right up until his retirement. I can still see Grandad to this day with his lunchbox going up to work, coming home for lunch, even though he just lived up the road from work. He used to always bring home sugar, so the family was never without sugar. Our family still visits the land all the time. we take our kids out there, because that's part of our memories that we can pass on to them. We recently had a wedding there about 2 years ago. My brother, a younger brother, had got married there, so that was a great occasion because all the family had come together, and yeah, we went to the land that we grew up on. Well, all my granddad's sons and their sons, my cousins, at some point have worked in the sugar industry doing the crushing, carting. We've all lived on cane farms at some point in our lives. I've still got a brother who actually works in the sugar industry. The sugar industry is a part of our daily lives, and sugar will always remain in our blood, in our family.
Great stories. Our next session is called Island Connections, and in this session we'll explore individual and community strength through connections within Queensland and across island homes. We're going to have 3 speakers. They'll be talking each in turn, and at the end I will invite the 3 of them to join me up here, and we'll have a bit of a panel discussion. First up, though, is Sonia Minicon. Sonia Minicon is the founder and chair of Blackbird International, an organisation which assists Australian South Sea Islanders who are the descendants of those who were brought to Australia to work as labourers in sugar and other industries, and helping them reconnect with their families in the Pacific. Sonia.
Thank you very much. It's an absolute pleasure and privilege to be asked to come here this weekend and to speak before you particularly, and also see what else has been going on. Is that better? Sorry. See what else has been going on with the march outside, the exhibition last night. My name is Sonia Minicon. I am a descendant of the Kabi Kabi people of South East Queensland, which I'm very proud to say, but particularly very proud to say I'm a descendant of the people of Vanuatu. I'd like to acknowledge traditional owners who are here amongst us and those who have gone before us. I'd like to acknowledge our South Sea Islander elders and leaders who are here, and I'd have to also make sure we remember those who have gone before us. So today I'm just going to briefly tell you a little bit about myself and my story. I guess I should sort of let you know who I am, where I'm from. My father, his father is actually from Ambrym Island. My father's mother her mother was a Kabi Kabi woman, but her father was from Pentecost. So he was one of the earlier people brought across. On my mother's side, her father was brought from Lacona Bay, Gower. Her mother, however, was a first generation, born from a man and lady from the island of Umbai. So we've got a wide and varied connection back to Vanuatu, which I'm constantly searching and connecting with. I'd first like to start, I guess, in saying what 150 years means to me, and I was also privileged to be a part of the video, the storytelling. So I'd like to share my story with you initially, just to tell you what it means to me, and for me it was also about acknowledging our women who have really shaped our lives, who've grown strong and resilient out of everything that's happened. So if you're right, we'll just quickly put on my video and go from there. Thank you.
I would like to take you on a journey. Can you imagine you're with your brothers and sisters playing on a beach and a small boat pulls up? As you and your siblings approach to take a closer look, you're grabbed and pulled into the small boat. Some of your siblings escape and run. However, you're forced in, and before you know it, you are leaving the shoreline and the beach where you played and the village where you lived. You were then taken to a large ship, put into a hold, where there are other children just like you. Here you sit, afraid, and wish you were back in your village. As the days pass, more young people are thrown into darkness with you. Eventually you were let out of the hold and into the sunlight, clothed, and you were marched off with a group of other young people, taken away. Eventually, ahead of you, you see fields of sugarcane. As a young woman, my great-grandmother was one of the few young women amongst the young men taken from their village to work in the cane and other primary industries on which this state of Queensland was made. These were young, strong men and women with strong cultures, languages, and came from vibrant, traditional village and family lives. My name is Sonia Minicon. I'm a proud descendant of the Cubby Cubby people of South East Queensland, but also of the people of Vanuatu, and I'm a direct descendant of the people of Ambrym, Pentecost, Umbai and Gower. So to acknowledge my ancestors and my culture makes me proud. And to honour the women who have shaped me and many of our Australian South Sea Islander families, it just seems like the right thing to do this year. It's 150 years since the first legislated landing of the islanders brought to Queensland for the sugar industry. The work was back-breaking, many became sick, they became weak and many were injured. If they were lucky, they were also able to work in homes as domestics, cleaning and cooking and caring for the children of plantation owners. I often wondered how they mustered the strength to do this work and endured the hardships, but their ability to hold on to their beliefs and newly found faith made these women even stronger. So they grew into staunch and protective wives and mothers. Many also cared for their extended families and communities in which they belonged. The generations of women that were born out of the first recruits grew up with the living knowledge of the struggles of their parents and mothers faced. There was blatant mistreatment and deliberate racial discrimination and a growing push for these families to feel like they didn't belong here. But as women do, they persisted and grew. We were proud and hard-working people with strong family connections and support, and the women used this as leverage to grow and succeed. We as Australian South Sea Islanders have withstood the test of time, persevering and protecting our families, and I'm proud to say that I'm a descendant of the women of the trade.
And that's it. No. So I guess my organisation I'd like to share with you is called Blackbird International, and as I said, it's about helping families to reconnect back to their islands of origins with their families. And the reason why Blackbird was established was from my own journey, and that was the first journey we took was to the island of my grandfather, and that was back to the island of Ambrym. If you know what Ambrym's like, or some of those islands, it's a black volcanic island. Back when we went, there wasn't much going on there. No running water, no electricity, and it was certainly a culture shock, as amongst other things, wonderful things for my family. I guess when we landed there, it was also for the anniversary or to celebrate or commemorate my father's passing. So there were a lot more, I guess, events and activities going on during that time. It was a lead up of about 10 years for us to actually do that reconnection with my father's family and to make sure that we all knew we were connecting with the right people. And that's, for me, the most important thing, is that we're all lost and we're all desperately looking for each other. And that's on both sides, but we have to make sure we connect with the right families. We went back to this beautiful little island of Ambrym in our little Mother Hubbard dresses and our Oakley sunglasses, not knowing what to expect, and were greeted with many meals of wonderful woo-woo, which is breadfruit cooked in coconut, which we have now I've grown to appreciate very much, and just sitting down with family and sharing so much lost culture and lost information between our families while we were there. As it was a celebration or commemoration of my grandfather's loss, and us returning to that island, we were privileged to have been involved or been asked to witness a very special custom that they practice on Ambrym, which is called the Rom, and it's a chiefly practice for grade-taking ceremonies, and they only do it once a year, and this particular time was only for a certain level of chief to be performing at this time. We didn't know what to expect, so we get up this morning after we'd had a lot of days of a lot of cultural exchange and wonderful surprises with family, and walked to this clearing in the bush, and I swear that 2 days earlier that clearing wasn't there. I swear it was just still all bush. And we were invited into what they call the showgrounds, and we're told that usually women aren't allowed to enter the showgrounds. It's taboo, you don't do it, but because it was a special occasion, they allowed us to stand in amongst the circle. Afterwards, I probably would have been happy to stand outside a long way away after what had happened. No, it was lovely. It was, I guess Ambrym is known as a black magic island, and so that culture is still very strong over there. So we were standing in amongst this circle, and sort of standing there, there's my mother, my sister who's here, and her husband, my husband, and my brother, wondering what was going to happen. It was very quiet, and we turned around, and about 200 people seemed to step out from the bush, but they were all silent. And so we sort of huddled a bit closer together because we were thinking, oh gosh, what's happening next? And then we heard some whistling and shouting and calling coming from the bush. And I was just wondering what was happening. And it was getting louder and louder. And then I swear the ground started to move beneath our feet. And they were stamping and stomping and making their way into the circle to greet us. And I don't know whether the photos come up already, but these men were dressed in these suits of leaves that were covered most of their body, and they had these big masks on that were vibrant and bright in colour, but at the same time looked a bit scary, and they had these big conical sleeves on with shakers on the end, and they all came out, and all of a sudden all you heard was and it was like, oh my gosh, what do we do now? And it was wonderful. It was just the most exciting thing that we'd witnessed, and they continued to dance and perform for us in a very wonderful way. And we realised that this is something that our grandfather, would probably do if he hadn't been taken, and something that our father and our uncles would have been doing also. So we realised how strong that was to our family and to our culture. And so I guess with that, and after we came home, realised that we have to help other people to experience the same thing, and that's why we started Blackbird. But when you go over, as a lot of you have, you also realise they are a developing nation, some of these countries. And so you just want to do whatever you can to help. And so we try and do as much as we can also, and whether that's through just donations or helping take materials back for the schools and the piccaninnies, or rebuilding churches. It's just part of now what we do, and it's what drives me. I guess finally, one thing that we're going to be doing this year, which we'd invite anybody to come along to, is our soccer tournament, which we held last year, which Rolf knows about, and it's actually grown. It's our sports and cultural festival, so we'll have soccer and canoe races and Mother Hubbard dress competitions, but we'll also be having 40 people from Rockhampton coming with us, and their families from Ambrym, so we'll be taking them back home too. So I just want to say that to all of you out there, if you haven't been back home, go home, and we're happy to help in any way we can, because it's the best thing that you'll ever experience in your life. Thank you.
Sonia, thank you very much. Our next speaker knows a lot about Vanuatu culture, Ralph Regan Vanu. Ralph's a Vanuatu anthropologist, artist, and now politician. He was director of the Vanuatu National Cultural Council from 1995 till 2010. He is currently the Minister for Lands and Natural Resources in the Vanuatu government. He's been a leading figure in Vanuatu's cultural world, primarily as a promoter of cultural knowledge, preservation and sustainable development, and has represented Vanuatu and its culture in the international sphere, notably through UNESCO. When he got into Parliament in 2008, he topped the tally in Port Vila, which is a multi-member constituency, but he got the very top vote. He got re-elected last year, and now his party, the Ground and Justice Party, has 3 members of Parliament at least. Ralph Regan Vanu.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm very happy to be here and happy to see all of you. People come from many different places. I was fortunate to be in Amberley this year for the Blackbird competition, soccer competition, and we were actually up in the north and all these teams were marching over the volcano, 15 of them, I think. A morning's walk at least to get to the competition, so you saw the real impact this was having, and of course Ambram's soccer teams are now some of the better ones in Vanuatu because of this. So I want to talk about some of the things that people in Vanuatu see as important in making the connections with the descendants of our Nakamals and Nasaras here in Australia. People in Vanuatu know about this history. There's lots of stories. As always with cultural stuff, traditions, the old people wait for the young people to ask them. They're not going to come and tell you. You got to ask. So we try and encourage young people to ask the stories, because then they all come out. And there's so many stories. There's so many places around Vanuatu where, because we don't have a tradition of literacy, our indexes, like our library catalogue cards, are the sites in the landscape. So you'll see a stone, it indexes a particular story. Or you'll see a river mouth, another story. And so one of the jobs I was doing when I was working in cultural heritage was to go around and register these places and the stories, get the people to talk about what happened here. And I found that there were many, many stories about people being taken and some people coming back, related to places on the coast. Of course, related to churches also, because a lot of churches were set up by people who came back from Queensland. They got missionised here, came back and set up churches and mission stations back in Vanuatu. So what is happening now in Vanuatu is that I'm here as a representative of the government. The government is very keen to do what people are wanting, which is make better connections with our families here in Australia, and also to make the connection easier. So to talk about making the connection easier, this is something which we have to do at the level of government. The Australian government, the Vanuatu government, and we need to work with the communities here to make those connections easier, to make it easier for sports exchanges, cultural exchanges, to make it easier to share what we have, our skills, our capacity, our resources. And we should be able to do that because we are one people, right? Separated by these national boundaries. And what we see, as Sonia said, I mean, Vanuatu is a least developed country in the world. We've got, in the UN rankings, we're at the bottom, Australia's at the top in terms of cash income. So that's something also which we're interested to get some fairer sharing of benefits, especially considering that our communities here were the ones who built up a lot of the economies of Queensland in particular. So in that context, we are looking at things like trying to, one, make it easier for South Sea Islander community in Australia who are Australian citizens to come to Vanuatu and do what they want to do, and come back and find where they're from and do what they want to do with their families, and to be completely free to do that as you would being a person from Vanuatu. So what we are talking about is this concept that was brought up a few years ago in Parliament, in the Parliament in Vanuatu, and many parties have signed up to this. It's sort of like a declaration that we want to give what we call customary citizenship to all the families here in Australia, which means in Vanuatu's constitution we don't allow dual citizenship, but we want to allow it for anyone who is descended from Vanuatu who lives somewhere else and has a passport of a different country, which means all the Vanuatu descended Australian and South Sea Islanders here in Australia. So that is a political movement that is happening now, and I hope that, it's very unstable in Vanuatu, even more unstable than Australia. But hopefully, if things go well, by next year this will go to referendum. To amend the constitution, you have to go to referendum, and everyone has to vote. And we hope that next year we will take this issue to referendum to try and get everyone to agree that yes, all our families who are living in Australia, they are our families, they come from us. We want them to have the same rights in Vanuatu as we do, which means once you get that citizenship, it reaffirms the customary membership that you already have. That's nothing to do with states or laws, which you do have by going back, as Sonia has been talking about. And once you reconnect with the family, then you're reconnecting with the clan, with the nakamal, with the land, with all the stories, with all the family, and you become a member. This is to try and get rid of the government-state bureaucratic boundaries to that happening. We also think that by doing that, it will encourage the Australian government to then do some things on its part to make this easier. And one of the things we're looking for is, if, for example, we want to come over here to meet families, to help them, to do cultural exchanges and stuff, that should be facilitated as well by the Australian government. So we're looking for those kind of arrangements as well, which is why we think we need to do something first before we can expect Australia to do something. So those things are quite advanced in Vanuatu now, those discussions. I mean, pretty much we all know about them. We were able to raise them again just last month when we had the commemoration of the 150th anniversary in Port Vila, which many South Sea Islanders came over for. Many of you in the audience came over for that. You could see the commitment at the government level. There was all the Prime Minister, Deputy Prime Minister, ministers and MPs and chiefs, leaders from the National Council of Chiefs and church leaders were all present for that. So there's a high level of commitment to these reconnections. But one of the things that my involvement with these issues since about 2011, since about 2 years ago, has been to try to encourage the communities here to see that there needs to be a voice for Australian South Sea Islanders that the government of Vanuatu can talk to. So that when we're talking with the Australian government, we are representing the views of our people who live in Australia as well. And that's why I've been trying to encourage as much as possible everybody to participate in one talk that happened last year, and then there's the November meeting this year, to see if this one voice can be brought out again from all the different communities that are around, mainly Queensland and New South Wales. And if we look back at the history of Australian South Sea Islander organising in Australia, I mean, when the recognition happened, which was about 20 years ago, it was because of this amazing work that had been done by the Australian South Sea Islanders United Council, a single voice for Australian South Sea Islanders that achieved this recognition, that achieved federal funding and state funding for exchanges and so on. And so it is because of those people that were doing that work then and able to represent a unified voice that the recognition happened. And we should not be under any illusion that it would have happened otherwise. It wouldn't have. It was because there was a single voice that was advocating why it happened. Okay, the recognition happened. things have, with the Australian South Islanders United Council, have not necessarily kept up that level. I think maybe the recognition was achieved and that was seen as we've achieved what we set out to do. But I think there's a lot to do. There's still a lot to do, and we all know there's still a lot to do. There's a lot of opportunities for enhanced outcomes for all of us in any field that you want to talk about, in terms of cultural exchange, in terms of learning back our identities, in terms of reconnecting with family, in terms of economic opportunities for Ni Vanuatu and for Australian South Islanders here in Australia, in terms of opportunities for making the rest of Australia aware. We heard about that just before lunch, how little it's represented in the curriculum, how few people know about this history, which they should know about. All of these are issues which we have to advocate for. They're not going to be done without advocacy. And I think the Vanuatu government has stepped up to make these statements. Our Prime Minister just a few weeks ago called for an apology from the Australian government, which is reported all over the news here in Australia. So that's something that we are doing to try and see if we can get these opportunities to happen again, or to get these new possibilities for the Australian South Islander community here in Australia and the people in Vanuatu and the Solomons to work together to get some better outcomes for our people all together. But at the same time, we very much hope that on the 1st and 2nd and 3rd of November, when the One Talk happens here, that people do send representatives from all the associations that exist to participate and to, give weight and encouragement and support to have somebody that is going to do this work on behalf of us all and represent us in this work. I come from, politics in Vanuatu, so I know all about disunity and division, and I think we see that the worst traits of our political disunity as Ni Vanuatu have been represented in the community here as well. So you got that from us. So now we are appealing that maybe, we need to move beyond this, because in Vanuatu we have a government, so same as in Australia, whether you voted for them or not, they're your government, they represent what you say. So I think for the Solomons, which is the other big country involved in this issue, this international issue, it's not an Australian issue. For the Solomons, we've got the Prime Minister of the Solomons speaking tomorrow in Bundaberg. I very much hope he's going to echo these kind of sentiments, but he's come over for this, so obviously it's very important to the government of the Solomons. I'm here for this. What we very much would like to see is a strategy that has Vanuatu, the Solomons, speaking with Australia, and then we have the Australian South Islanders at the table, represented through their voice that has been endorsed by all Australian South Islanders. We need that at the table to talk about these issues. If we talk with Australia without the Australian South Islanders, it's just like, it's not going to work. We need to be able to say that, yes, we have that voice at the table, this is what the community wants. So I suppose I'm here to say that. And I'll be back with many from Vanuatu at the beginning of November for that meeting. And I hope that we are coming with a number of initiatives we want to take forward. I'm involved also with a festival, Fest Napuan, which happens every second half of the year in Vanuatu. It's the biggest musical festival in the South Pacific. We'll be coming to the November meeting saying we want to sign a memorandum of agreement with the new national body to have South Islanders present at every festival that happens, to set up a stall where you can come and share stories, find family, try and do that as a context of a big 5-day festival that happens, the biggest festival that happens in Vanuatu. I know that there'll be more connections wanting to be made in terms of sports. We're hearing about this rugby league team, right, from Vanuatu who's coming over. There's groups from Vanuatu who want to come over and do tours. There's all the seasonal employment issue, which provides an opportunity for those connections. But we're looking forward to be able to start to talk about those issues with all of you through someone that will speak on your behalf. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ralph. Our third speaker is Melda Miller. She's the Assistant Curator, Torres Strait Islander and Pacific Indigenous Studies at the Queensland Museum, where she has worked extensively with Australian South Sea Islander custom collection for 13 years. Melda's principal areas of interest is the history of the past, present and future of South Sea Island labour in Queensland. She assisted with the research and development behind the 2001 exhibition, Refined White. The project followed the history of the 62,000 people who, 50 to 62,000, predominantly from Solomons and Vanuatu, who were transported to Queensland over those years. So, Melda, please.
Thank you, Sean. Thank you, Ralph and Sonia, for being in the session with me. I'd just first like to take the opportunity to acknowledge the traditional owners on the lands that we're gathering on today. But I'd like to, acknowledge our Australian South Sea Islanders elders, past and present. It's all catching up. It's been a long, long month. I'm sorry. There's so many things that I have to say and so little time and so many people to thank. I've been on a journey for a number of years. I think I stopped counting after 13 because it just gets ridiculous because people start to add up your age. And I like to think that they think I'm a little bit younger than what I am. But, you know, I really like to take this moment in time to thank people like Joe and Monica who are here today, and Rowena who have kindly come and joined us from the north. It's such an honour, and Sunny Baikwa, thank you for coming. These are people I've met on this journey, and it's just been, I've been so privileged, and I don't often get the opportunity to say thank you. So from the bottom of my heart, I thank you all. I thought I'd just start with, my presentation today is just about, it's the telling the stories that counts. It's not about that it is a particular story, but it's about all the stories. I'll just start with a little bit about letting you know who I am, but I'm a third generation descendant of Australian South Sea Islanders. My family, I'll just try and get a slide change. Thank you. Sorry to my family here in the audience. But I just thought I'd explore a little bit about my family connections so you get an understanding of where I am at. But this is my mother's family from Joscalee in central Queensland. I'm a third generation, and the top photo is she's one of the babies in the photo, I think. And then on the bottom photo is a very old family photo from Christmas way back in the 1998, I think, or 1987. And I can see my family cringing in the audience, so I'll quickly change the slide. Here is my father's family. In particular, my father's mother's side of the family, which is the Kaya side, which is, my mother's side was from Ambrym, and the Kaya side, my understanding, is from Malakula. And so the family figure continues on into the future. It's something I've inherited from my family. But I think, this identity with these people, it's about, it's why I do what I do, I suppose. My job is to work as a curator in the Queensland Museum, and I don't know how I got here, but I did, and I try to use what I do through exhibitions, through public programming, through looking after objects. I use that to try and create an awareness about South Sea Islander, Australian South Sea Islander culture, the connections we have to Vanuatu and the Solomon Islands and other Melanesian countries, and try to promote that to a wider audience to hopefully create awareness out there in the community about who we are. Because to move on and to go on and to do all these other things, people need to know who we are as a people, you know, our history, our heritage, our culture, but us as people, and that we are people, and people need to understand this. But I've been, I've had the pleasure of working with objects, in particular from the custom collection. I look after something like, I think it's about 26,000 objects in our collection. That's just belonging to the Pacific and Torres Strait. And, but I have the privilege of looking after what I call the custom collection. It is the collection that attracted my attention many years ago when I used to do school tours for schools, and I found this collection. I thought, that's from Vanuatu. I think I am from Vanuatu. I wonder if I can know more. And the curator at the time, senior curator at the time, Mr. Michael Cornell, is a big, big support in people connecting with their heritage and their history. And I said to him one day, can I work on this collection? He said, for sure. He goes, and I was very shy back then, and I'd scurry away, and then I'd get up the courage to come back up with another idea. And I said to him, I think that our community needs to know these objects exist. I mean, how can I do that? And he says, well, you've got to find some money and do all these things. And so, it's little steps, but, little steps towards a bigger picture, I suppose. And so I've had the opportunity to work with people all over the place. I still don't know how I get to do this, but I do, and it's wonderful. And, my idea is that we have these objects in museums and libraries that have context from people from the outside, but what I wanted to do was bring some context from the inside about what these documents mean, that exist in the state archives, and what these photos mean that are in the State Library, and what does this object, that sits here before me, what connection do I have with that, or what do others have with this object? And I think all these questions come from a journey I took back in 1998 with my parents to Vanuatu, and we only went to a whātei, but I think I was 25 or something, 23 at the time. And I was actually sitting with this gentleman right down the front here, Uncle Joe, and we were 4 days into the trip, and I just thought for a moment, I get it. I actually get it. And I remember him saying to me, what do you get? I can't use my name, but he said, Melda, what do you get? And I said, I get where I come from. I said, people say that I'm happy and that I'm proud, and, I think, well, isn't everybody, But when I got there, I realised, no, it comes from a deeper place. And I just felt like a lightning bolt hit me in the heart, and I felt, this is it. I know where I'm from. And I think the journey to want to explore that more, that's what drives me. And I think I'm just someone with passion who cares about people's stories and cares about connecting to a place. And I think that's why I do the things I do. And then another part of my job is dreaming about what is it that we leave today that tells the story about us, at our 200th anniversary. What is the story that we tell people about who we are today in the future? So I put that question out to everyone. And in part of that question, I ask about identity. Who are we, and what do we teach our children that is Australian South Sea Islander culture? When I was growing up, I went to my grandmother's every weekend, and I just took it for granted that everybody did that. And it wasn't until I was actually older, and I spent Christmas with my cousins, and, I thought everybody did this on their holidays, and they didn't. And I thought everybody ate fish and rice like I did. And I can remember pleading with my parents, like, really, can I just have sausages tonight? Because I cannot eat fish again. Like, I really can't. But I think it's moments like these, like, you know, when I went to recognition in 2000, you know, I'd watched the elders work really hard to achieve this. You know, they went to meetings all the time. They talked about it. They talked about it at the table. And I just, you know, I thought, yeah, this is such hard work, you know, but it was really important. And I think what the connection I made at that point was back to a childhood memory of saying to my parents, where am I from? And I remember Mum pulling out a tea towel that had the New Hebrides on it. And I clearly remember this because at this stage in my life, I still thought the world was flat. I hadn't actually made that, you know, connection that it's round. And I thought, where is this place? I don't understand. So to go on a journey that took me from a tea towel and some stories to actually going to the place that, you know, my grandmother talked about and our elders talked about, like, you know, you've got to go back there, you know, we've got to make the effort. To make that journey, it's just amazing. And I just hope for more members of our community that they make that journey and they make that connection to that place just for their heart, you know, just to know where they belong and that there are others, you know, there are more of us. We think there's a lot of us here, but there are more out there. So I think, and I think I've been lucky enough to go on this journey through exhibitions. And so I just want to share with you a couple of exhibitions I've worked on over time. And one of them is Refined White, which I was lucky enough to do with John Waldron back in 2001. Now, this man hired me without even meeting me. And I was sitting in the library one day researching through the photos, as I said I would. And this person comes in and says, oh, I want to see the photos. And I thought, I'm not giving them up right now. And then I realised it was John. And that was the first time I'd met him, and I'd been working for him for something like, 3 months. And I just, he mentored me through this process of exhibition and grew this passion inside of me to want to tell stories. And it just hasn't stopped. So we're very lucky. And one of the things we did during this is we took about 1,000 photographs. I travelled with a photographer, and we captured these images of Australian South Sea Islanders, and the idea was to take that image of us being in the sugar industry and take us out into a contemporary world, like that we are doing things. We're not just still. Some of us are still working in sugar, but others are working for government. We're very powerful, very strong, very positive, and we're moving forward. And and that we've lived this whole life. So we captured it back then because it was before digital, so we captured this on film. And I'm very happy to say that the State Library of Queensland this year acquired this collection of images. So now that this collection will, it's one of the legacies of this 150th year. My Island Homes, I had a little break and I came back to do My Island Homes with Olivia Robinson. And that was on the Sunshine Coast, and we worked with Datsi, the descendants of Australian South Sea Islanders on the Sunshine Coast, and we wanted to do an exhibition in conjunction with the Floating Lands Festival, which is a big international arts environmental festival up on the Sunshine Coast. And their theme for that year was water currents. And so I said to Olivia, let's play with, we've got 2 homes, and I said, My Island Homes, Australia is an island, and these places we come from, our ancestral homes are islands, and so let's talk about that. And one of the problems that struck us is that there wasn't a lot of documentation documenting about history on the Sunshine Coast, and so I said to Olivia, well, let's start creating history, this is it, And so and we approached the community about what what is it that we could do other than the exhibition? What else could we do? And they said, well, you could record some stories. And, you know, I'm really proud to say Sonny Minicon is here today to share in his story. And one of the stories that I'd just like to share with you from that also is the story I did with Rex Eglame's younger brother of Jeanette. And he thought he didn't have a story, and I come across this a lot. People think they don't have stories. And he spoke about his story, and it was wonderful, you know, living in this landscape of the Sunshine Coast and his experience over time with growing up, education, racism, all those kind of topics. But I came to ask him about what did the Australian South Sea Islander recognition mean to him. And he said, and it's like he took this moment and he said, you know what? He goes, it kind of makes me sad because my parents never got to see it happen and they fought very hard for this. And for me, and I'm sorry, I have to sort of read this, but for me it's not about hard-hitting interviews, but what I hope to do is create atmospheres or places for people to take the time to remember and acknowledge the past in the present, bringing that past into the present, to take difficult histories or painful pasts and to help people bring words to the history, the emotions and the experience. Naming and articulating these feelings so people are not alone in this, that this is a shared history, a shared pain, and you don't have to be alone. And so what I like to do is get people to take a moment to think about who they are as an Australian South Sea Islander, and to think about the past and acknowledge it, but also think about the future, the current times, and the story they have to tell for the future. I've been working on the railways was the next exhibition I did, and this was done with, the Queensland Museum actually has 5 campuses, and this is with our railways campus out at Ipswich. They asked me, they said they wanted to tell the story of Torres Strait Islanders, Aboriginal people and South Sea Islanders working in the railway. And so I said, oh, okay, I've seen a lot of people working in the railways over my time, and so it just meant I had to go and convince a few people to tell their stories. But one of the most memorable moments for me was interviewing the lovely Sonia Minicon and her mother Maureen about her father's time in the railway. It was a magical interview, and I was with Dr. Geraldine Mate, who is currently my head of program. And we talked to Sonia and her mother about her father working in the railway and how they lived and how they moved through the landscape. And, and this wasn't a modern, this is probably in the 70s. And it was the things they did and how they moved around and how they got education, how they travelled, how they kept in contact. It was just, and then we had this moment with Sonia's mother where she said to me, Dad, he was the one that had all this, he was the one that led the way. I was just the wife. And we went, no, you are not just the wife. You raised 10 kids, 10, did I get that number? 10 children while working and moving through the landscape and working on the railways. This was a bigger story. This wasn't just about a man going out and making a wage for his family. It was the family that was waiting for him to come home, or the men that went away and they were away for ages, and the mothers looking after children. She was speaking out for them, and it was one of the most powerful moments, I think, for me, about people, the people who think that they don't have a story, who really have an awesome story to share. And I think that's what, I don't confess to knowing everything. I just feel that I'm a facilitator that helps people to tell their own stories in their own ways. Sugar is the exhibition I helped the Queensland Art Gallery with this year, and it was a great privilege to work with Ruth McDougall, the curator of Pacific Art. It was a journey for us, and Ruth and I had never worked together before, and Ruth asked me if we would be able to record some interviews to do with the sugar industry. And I said, Ruth, there is a couple of people that work there, but we fished it out a little bit, and I think Ruth has a really interesting perspective because this is about art meeting history, meeting Australian South Sea Islander culture. And so this is a really fascinating combination. And Ruth had some images from the Mackay area. So we identified 6 people in the Mackay region who were identified by Australian South Sea Islanders in the Mackay region. And we went out and we interviewed them about their experiences in the sugar. And it was a really delightful, a wonderful experience. And we got to interview the likes of Mr. Robert Ball, or Bobby Ball is what I know him as, and Mr. Rejo Yasseri. This was, for me, it's some of the things I get to do, I'm just so privileged because someone like Bobby Ball, I've grown up with all my life, and I've heard him say 20 words at any one time. But he could not stop smiling when he was telling his story. Like, this light came on inside, and it was just so wonderful to be able to experience that happiness. And I think one of the memorable things that was said on this visit was from Rejo Yasseri, the gentleman up in the top corner. And he, at the end of his interview, Ruth asked him if he had anything else to add. And he said, I'm over 60 years old and you're the first people to come and ask me for my story. So it was just a moment for us about how important our jobs in big institutions, like our responsibilities, not just our jobs, our responsibilities to Queensland communities, to the collection of Queensland communities' history and heritage. Now, which brings me to Memories of a Forgotten People. This is when we joined up with the Queensland Museum, State Library of Queensland, and Queensland Art Gallery and Modern Art joined together on this project. I thought, this is big. That 3 state institutions would join together on this project to create awareness about Australian South Sea Islander history and heritage for, over the last 150 years. How the spirits came to be that we would all be in these positions and be aligned to be able to do this is just, I'm actually speechless about it, because when I think about it, it's monumental that the state institutions would put the message out there and say, we are going to support this and we are going to encourage people to get an education, create awareness. It's been an eye-opening experience doing it on this kind of level, but a very rewarding one. But my whole idea behind this year was to bring faces to the history. I think our history people, they hear it in books, but I think it's more about putting a face. And so hearing all these digital stories about people's experiences, it's naming and putting a face to the history, and that this actually affects people. And that whenever, don't deny this history. It's here, it's a shared history. So, thank you. We're working really well with the slides, it's good. So, I'd just like to say it's been a growing experience, and I too have been on my own fair share of experiences along the way. It's been happiness, sadness, joy and laughter and pain, but it's part of all of us, it's a part of who we are. But we can't let these feelings stop us from communicating these connections to our history and heritage. We need to communicate and articulate to help ourselves and to help others understand our lived experiences and to communicate the struggles of our ancestors. So some of our questions will never be answered, but we can help in our own ways to keep the connections alive. So thank you very much.
The only thing I'd contest there, Melda, is that you're speechless. Look, we've got a few minutes, so could I invite the three speakers to join me up here in the seats at the front, and we'll just throw it open for a few questions. We're starting to run out of time, but if Ralph and Sonia and Melda could just join me here. Sonia's just got some farewells to do. Look, I'll throw this open. Could I invite anyone who would like to make a comment or ask a question of either Ralph or Melda? There's one back there and one in the middle here.
Hi, Ralph. I was just wondering if you thought that the national body that hopefully will be set up in November or thereabouts would be, in your opinion, welcome at the Melanesian Spearhead Group as an official or a representative body.
Yeah, I think it would be. But the only way to get on that table is to have one body, right? And the West Papua National Coalition for Liberation, they've gone through that same process. Lots of groups in West Papua, they had to agree on one, and it came to the table in Noumea in June. And yeah, they're in the process now of getting accreditation to sit as an observer to influence policy in the Malaysian state. So that would be the next step.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if there was some sort of associate membership or whatever that would be agreed at the Melanesian Spearhead Group, because the FLNKS from New Caledonia is a full member. And as Ralph said, the West Papuans have now got an application in, and that's going to be considered in the next 6 months.
One's a question and the other one's a statement. Sorry. Do you have any idea, or does the government have any idea of what the actual population of these islands were before the removal of people, to get an idea of percentages of how many people were left behind, left at home and taken away, so to speak? Well, we know there was 62,000, but that seems an extraordinary number considering the size of the islands.
I'll answer that, yeah.
Yes, please.
From archaeological work in Vanuatu, the estimate for the pre-European sort of coming into the region population is, it's very rough, but it's between minimum of 500,000 people, and some people say up to 1 million. I would say, as a former director of the museum, I think closer to 500,000. So that's in, for example, around beginning of the 1800s. As we heard Professor Clive Moore say, the population of Australian South Sea Islanders in Australia in that period up until the deportation happened had the highest death rate of any group that we know of in Australia, which was about 30%, was it?
Yep.
But if you go back to Vanuatu, based on the only records we have of the population, what happened, which is missionary records, especially from the island of Enriching, where the first missionary came and kept population every year. We know that the population of Vanuatu in the period of the 1800s up until the beginning of the 1900s declined by 90%. So of 100 people, you'd have 10 left. And we take that to be the situation that happened throughout Vanuatu, and I think it must have happened in the Solomons as well, the whole Pacific. So we're reduced down to, after deportation from Australia and the people who came back, about 10 years later, the population of Vanuatu was 40,000 people. And so now we're back to 260. We're still a long way from where we were before blackbirding.
And there was quite a considerable death rate on some of those islands that were sandalwood, weren't there? There was quite a sandalwood trade from some of the islands, and the diseases brought in by the sandalwood merchants absolutely decimated some of those islands.
And as someone who used to go around recording cultural sites in the islands, you go from one coast to the other coast of an island and there's just settlement everywhere. Whereas today, there isn't. Today, there's people settled on the coast and the interiors are kind of empty, most islands. So we still haven't got back to that population that used to be there.
The next is the statement. Through my work for the last 15 years, working with community museums, there's actually a wealth of South Sea Islander material which is largely undocumented. And this would have been an ideal opportunity with the sesquicentenary of South Sea Islanders here in Australia to do a thematic study of that. Not saying that it should have been done within this context, but some of those items, like I'll illustrate one which I just think is absolutely extraordinary, and it has relation to the Pacific Islanders Protection Act as well, is one of the fiancés of a plantation owner in Yengari, just near Maryborough. She was appalled, by the way her beau was actually treating South Sea Islanders, so she embroidered this belt depicting him in the way that he was treating South Sea Islanders and presented it to him. He rejected the belt, but also rejected her eventually as well. So the marriage didn't go ahead. But it's an extraordinary piece of cultural history, and it actually sort of encapsulates, that moment also from sort of a domestic point of view. And Yengari was one of the places of where the level of abuse attracted government attention and, caused changes to the Protection Act as well. So it's quite an interesting piece, but that's just one of many thousands of objects in these local collections that are run mostly by volunteers, but are largely undocumented. They just have a label on it saying, what the object is, but not its, within its context. Yeah.
Melda, do you have anything?
Yeah, thanks, Fiona. But there are a lot of objects and a lot of documentation that exists out there about South Sea Islanders and their descendants, whether it be in record books or accounting books, but there's farmers out there with records. So there's a whole avenue that's still yet to be explored. And I think next weekend with the walk on to Townsvale, the property where the Islanders of the Don Juan went to, that whole idea of joining with the plantation owners and getting that conversation going, hopefully that'll inspire other people who have connections to this trade of islanders to come out with more documentation also. And I think that's a bit of about where are we going next, I suppose.
I'm afraid we're really running out of time. Is there any one final question anyone would like?
Oh, sorry.
Just with the Blackbird.
Yeah, can you hear me? Yeah, well, I guess what we find amazing is that this year we've actually had a huge increase, which is fantastic in that. But as I said in my talk, it's a long journey, and we take families to the point where we give them as much information as we possibly can. We talk to the families from their islands and get them to provide that information, and ultimately it's up to the families for when they're ready to reconnect, because it's such an emotional time for them. We connected a family last year, and we're doing videos, got to the area where we're exchanging videoing the family in Vanuatu and videoing the family in Australia and exchanging those. It took about 3 months for the family in Australia to actually get the family together and find it in them to watch it, because it was so emotional. And so now they're getting to a point where they're ready to go back. But it's a long emotional journey. Sorry, I'm getting emotional talking about them. We took a family back earlier this year, and in April, and it was like, for me, going back home again. So, yes, whilst we continue to help more, look, any support and, information we can get and help from people in Vanuatu as well. Families here, there's so many families here who still are finding out how we're all related to each other as well. And so it's time for us all, I think, to come together and share our stories. It's such an important time, and that's going to help reconnect families.
Could you thank our 3 speakers? Thank you very much.